That's not a school project. That's trash on my rug. The red paint hit the carpet like blood, and a little girl's scream filled the marble hallway. Her mother dropped to her knees, begging. The fiancé just smiled and said, "Clean it up before my fiancé gets home." She didn't know he was already standing in the doorway. She didn't know he'd heard every word. And she had no idea this single moment was about to destroy the life she'd spent 5 years building. Welcome back, friends, to another story that will touch your heart. Today's story is about cruelty, kindness, family, and the painful truth that money can change a person, but it can never erase what's right and wrong. This is a story of injustice, redemption, and the quiet strength of the people we so often overlook. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? Now, let's begin. Nobody noticed the maid's daughter sitting quietly in the corner until her crayons told a story no one expected. In a sprawling estate just outside Greenwich, Connecticut, the Hartwell mansion rose like a monument to wealth. Marble floors stretched endlessly, chandeliers dripped crystal light, and every surface gleamed like it had never known a fingerprint. This was the home of Daniel Hartwell, a 38-year-old tech billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing, a kid from Ohio who once worked 2 jobs just to afford community college tuition. Daniel hadn't forgotten where he came from. Despite the wealth, despite the private jets and the magazine covers, he still believed in treating people with respect. It was one of the reasons his staff loved working for him. He paid them fairly, knew their names, asked about their families. Among his staff was Marisol Reyes, a 31-year-old single mother who had worked as the head housekeeper for almost 3 years. Marisol had come to America from Texas with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of giving her daughter a better life. Her daughter, 4-year-old Amara, was the light of her world, a bright, curious little girl with an imagination as big as the mansion she sometimes visited after preschool. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Amara's preschool had a half day and Marisol's babysitter had canceled last minute. With nowhere else to turn, Marisol asked permission to bring Amara to work, just for a few hours. Daniel, who happened to be home that day, smiled warmly. "Of course she can come," he said. "I love having a little one around here. This place could use more laughter." Amara settled at the small coffee table in the sitting room near the kitchen, content with the coloring book and a fresh set of crayons her mother had bought her as a reward for good behavior at school. She was working on something special, a project for her preschool's My Family assignment, due the next morning. She wanted to draw her mother as a superhero, complete with a cape and a crown, because to Amara, her mother was exactly that. Marisol checked on her every 20 minutes between cleaning duties, her heart swelling every time she peeked at the careful, crooked drawings. "You're doing so good, Mija," she whispered, kissing the top of Amara's head. "Mrs. Patterson is going to love it." Meanwhile, across the estate, preparations were underway for an engagement gala. Daniel's fiancée, Victoria Caldwell, had been planning the event for weeks, an extravagant celebration meant to announce their engagement to New York's elite. Victoria hadn't always been like this. Those who'd known her in college remembered a different woman entirely, warm, unpretentious, the kind of person who'd give you her last $20 without thinking twice. But 5 years of living among Manhattan's wealthiest families had changed her. Her circle of friends, women who measured worth in designer labels and zip codes, had slowly reshaped how she saw the world. She'd started small, a sharper tone with waitstaff, an eye roll at the help. Over time, the small cruelties became habits, and the habits became her personality. Deep down, somewhere beneath the Chanel and the cold stares, the old Victoria still existed. but she buried her so deep that even Victoria herself sometimes forgot she was there. That afternoon, Victoria swept through the mansion in a cream silk robe, barking orders at the event staff, inspecting flower arrangements with a critical eye. She paused at the sitting room doorway and saw Amara hunched over her coloring book, crayons scattered across the antique coffee table. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Whose child is this?" she demanded, though she already knew the answer. One of the staff members, nervous, explained quietly. "That's Marisol's daughter, ma'am. She's just finishing a school project. She'll be gone in." "I don't care about her school project," Victoria snapped. "Do you understand what's happening in this house tonight? I have the Whitfields, the Carringtons, half of page 6 coming through that door in 6 hours, and there is a maid's child playing with crayons on furniture worth more than her mother's salary." The staff member's face flushed with humiliation on Marisol's behalf, but no one dared argue with Victoria Caldwell. Amara, oblivious to the tension, looked up with a gap-toothed smile. "Look, I drew my mommy. She has a cape because she's the strongest person I know." For just a moment, one fragile, fleeting moment, something flickered across Victoria's face. A memory, perhaps, of her own mother, who had cleaned houses in Pittsburgh before Victoria's family's fortunes changed. A memory of being small and proud of something simple. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, swallowed by years of conditioning that told her sentiment was weakness and image was everything. "That's nice, sweetheart," Victoria said flatly, already turning away. "But you need to clear this table. Now." Amara's smile faltered. "But I'm not done. It's for tomorrow. I have to." "I said now." Marisol entered just in time to hear Victoria's sharp tone, and her stomach dropped. She rushed over, gently placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. "Miss Caldwell, I'm so sorry. She's almost finished. I'll have her move right. You should have thought about that before bringing her here on the most important day of my life." Victoria interrupted, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from across the room. "This is not a daycare, Marisol." The room went quiet. Several staff members froze mid-task, exchanging uneasy glances. Marisol felt her face burn with humiliation, but she swallowed her pride, as she had learned to do many times before. She needed this job. She needed it for Amara. "Yes, ma'am," Marisol said softly. "I'll have her finish at the kitchen table. Out of the way. Just 5 more minutes, please." Victoria's eyes narrowed, something cold and unyielding settling into her expression, the look of a woman who had learned that power meant never backing down, especially in front of an audience. 5 minutes, Victoria said, is 4 minutes and 59 seconds too long. And with that chilling line, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Marisol standing there, trembling, as her daughter looked up with confused, frightened eyes. What happened next would change everything, not just for Marisol and Amara, but for Victoria Caldwell herself, in ways she could never have imagined. A bucket of paint sat in the hallway, left over from the gala decorators, and Victoria was about to make a decision she could never take back. The afternoon wore on, and the mansion buzzed with frantic energy as the gala preparations intensified. Florists arranged towering centerpieces of white roses and orchids. A string quartet rehearsed in the ballroom. Caterers wheeled in trays of hors d'oeuvres wrapped in plastic. Amid the chaos, a leftover bucket of deep red paint sat near the entryway, used earlier that day by decorators touching up an accent wall before they realized the shade clashed with the gala's color scheme. Marisol had moved Amara to the kitchen table as promised, but with so many people moving through the house, space was tight, and within 20 minutes, a caterer politely asked if Amara could relocate again, this time to the small reading nook near the grand staircase, technically still part of the main hallway, but quieter and out of the way of the kitchen traffic. Marisol agreed reluctantly, settling Amara onto the soft rug with her nearly finished drawing. Just a little longer, baby. Almost done. Amara nodded, focused intently on coloring her mother's cape a brilliant shade of purple, her favorite color. She hummed softly to herself, a little song from her favorite cartoon, utterly absorbed in her work. It was at this moment that Victoria, finishing a final walkthrough with the event coordinator, rounded the corner of the staircase and spotted Amara again, this time sitting almost directly beneath the grand chandelier, in clear view of the front entrance where guests would soon arrive. Something inside Victoria snapped. "I cannot believe this," she muttered, loud enough for the coordinator beside her to hear. "I specifically said, 'Miss Caldwell, please,'" the coordinator, a kind woman named Renee, said carefully. "She's just a child. She's not bothering." "She is exactly bothering me," Victoria said, her voice climbing. "Do you understand what's at stake tonight? Forbes is sending a photographer. The Carrington Foundation is here to discuss a $1 million donation. And there is a maid's daughter sitting in the middle of my entryway like this is a daycare center." Renee opened her mouth to protest, but Victoria was already moving toward the paint bucket left by the decorators. Her hands trembled, not with hesitation, but with a kind of fury that had been building for hours, fueled by stress, by old insecurities about her own modest upbringing that she'd spent years trying to erase, by a desperate need to control every detail of a night meant to cement her place among the elite. She picked up the bucket. "Miss Caldwell, what are you?" Renee's voice cracked with alarm. Victoria didn't answer. She walked toward Amara, who looked up just in time to see the woman looming over her with the bucket raised. "This is your fault," Victoria hissed, though it was unclear if she meant Amara or Marisol, who came rushing around the corner at the sound of commotion, for not listening. The paint poured down in a thick, sickening wave, across the coloring book, across Amara's careful drawing of her mother as a superhero, across the little girl's pink dress, across the white rug beneath her. Amara screamed, scrambling backward, paint dripping from her small hands as she stared in shock at her ruined project. Hours of careful work, the gift she had been so proud to bring home, destroyed in seconds. "No! My picture! My picture for Mommy!" Amara sobbed, her small body shaking. Marisol dropped to her knees beside her daughter, gathering her into her arms, paint smearing across both of them. "It's okay, baby, it's okay, Mommy's here," she whispered, though her voice broke with barely controlled rage and grief. She looked up at Victoria, and for the first time in 3 years of careful, respectful silence, something in Marisol's eyes hardened. "How could you do this? She's a child." Victoria, breathing hard, looked down at the wreckage, the crying toddler, the ruined drawing, the spreading red stain across thousands of dollars of imported rug, and for a fraction of a second, horror flickered across her face. This wasn't who she used to be. But the moment of horror was quickly buried beneath defensiveness, the way it always was now. "Clean it up," Victoria said coldly, setting the empty bucket down with a hollow clatter. "Before my fiancé gets home." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble with sharp, deliberate steps, leaving Marisol cradling her sobbing daughter amid the ruins of a 4-year-old's pride and joy. What Victoria didn't know, what she had no way of knowing in that moment of blind, cruel frustration, was that Daniel Hartwell had returned home 20 minutes early. He had walked through the front door just as the paint hit the floor. He had heard every word. He stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, watching the scene unfold with an expression no one in that house had ever seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, but something colder, deeper, more devastating. The look of a man realizing, all at once, that the woman he was about to marry was not who he thought she was. Marisol noticed him first. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively pulled Amara closer, as if to shield her from further humiliation. "Mr. Hartwell," she stammered, "I'm so sorry about the rug. I'll clean it right away. Don't," Daniel said quietly, his voice low but firm. "Don't apologize. You did nothing wrong." He set his briefcase down slowly, his gaze fixed on Victoria, who had paused at the top of the staircase, suddenly aware of his presence, her face draining of color. "Daniel," she said, her voice unusually small. "I didn't know you were." "I know you didn't," he said. "That's exactly the problem." The silence that followed stretched long and unbearable, every staff member in the hallway frozen, watching, holding their breath. Victoria descended the stairs slowly, composing herself, reaching for the practiced charm that had smoothed over every social misstep for years. "Daniel, you're overreacting. It was an accident. The bucket slipped. I watched you pour it," Daniel said simply. "I heard everything you said. Every word." For the first time in 5 years of their relationship, Victoria had absolutely no response. And as the gala guests began arriving just hours later, none of them had any idea that the engagement they were about to celebrate was already, quietly, irreparably broken. What Daniel did next shocked everyone in that ballroom, including Victoria, who thought she knew exactly how this night would end. Daniel didn't say another word to Victoria. Instead, he knelt down beside Marisol and Amara, his expensive suit pressing into the paint-stained rug without a second thought. He looked at Amara, whose sobs had quieted into hiccuping breaths, her small hands still stained crimson. "Hey there," he said gently. "I saw your picture before. The one of your mom with the cape. It was really good." Amara sniffled, looking up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "It's ruined now." "You know what?" Daniel said, his voice soft but full of warmth. "I think I might know someone who can help fix that." He glanced up at Renee. "Can you get Amara some clean clothes and have someone help clean her up? And please, get her some fresh paper and crayons. The good ones, from the art room upstairs that my niece uses when she visits." Renee nodded quickly, grateful for direction, and gently led Amara and Marisol toward the staff quarters, leaving Daniel alone with Victoria in the grand entryway, the ruined rug between them like a physical manifestation of everything that had just shattered. "Daniel, please," Victoria said, her composure finally cracking. "Let me explain. The stress of tonight, the pressure, I wasn't thinking clearly. I would never normally." "That's the problem, Victoria," Daniel said, standing slowly, brushing paint from his knees. "This isn't the first time. I just never let myself see it before. The way you talk to the staff. The way you talk about people who weren't born with money. I told myself it was stress or nerves about the wedding or just, I don't know. I made excuses for you, because I loved who I thought you were." "I am that person," Victoria said desperately. "I'm still her. This world changes you. Daniel, you know that better than anyone." "It doesn't have to," Daniel said quietly. "I grew up with nothing. I scrubbed dishes in a diner to pay rent. And I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd never forget what it felt like to be looked down on. You used to understand that too. I remember the woman who cried with me when my dad passed, who spent her Saturdays volunteering at the shelter. Where did she go?" Victoria had no answer. Tears welled in her eyes, real tears, unlike the calculated ones she sometimes used to win arguments, but Daniel had already turned away, walking toward the staff quarters to check on Amara and Marisol. That night, the gala proceeded as scheduled. Guests arrived in droves of diamonds and tailored suits, oblivious to the storm that had passed through hours earlier. Victoria, ever the consummate performer, smiled and air-kissed, and accepted congratulations with practiced grace, though anyone looking closely might have noticed the hollowness behind her eyes. Daniel, however, did something no one expected. Midway through the evening, as the orchestra paused and Victoria's father prepared to give a toast, Daniel took the microphone instead. The room quieted, champagne glasses lowered, all eyes turning toward the billionaire host. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Daniel began, his voice steady despite the tension simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I want to tell you a story, not about Victoria and me, about someone else." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile froze in place. Earlier today, in this very house, a 4-year-old girl was working on a school project, Daniel continued. A drawing of her mother, her hero. And someone in this house, someone who is supposed to represent grace and class to all of you tonight, destroyed that drawing. Poured paint over a child's work because she was an inconvenience. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's father's face went pale. "That little girl's mother has worked in this house for 3 years, Daniel said. She's shown more dignity, more kindness, more genuine humanity than most people I've met in boardrooms or country clubs. And tonight, I realized something important. The people we choose to respect and the people we choose to dismiss says everything about who we really are." He paused, looking directly at Victoria, whose face had gone ashen. "I'm not announcing an engagement tonight," Daniel said quietly, the microphone amplifying his words to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I'm announcing that it's over." Victoria's glass slipped from her trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor. "What would you do?" Daniel asked the room, his voice softer now, almost sad. "If you discovered the person you loved had become someone you no longer recognized?" No one answered. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable and complete. Victoria fled the ballroom in tears, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her in front of 300 witnesses. And somewhere upstairs, unaware of the chaos unfolding below, Amara sat at a small art table with fresh paper and a brand new set of crayons, carefully beginning to redraw her mother, this time with an even bigger cape. 3 months later, 2 very different paths had unfolded, and only one of them led toward redemption. In the months that followed, the story of the gala spread quickly, first through whispered gossip among Manhattan's elite, then through local news outlets intrigued by the dramatic public breakup of one of the city's most prominent couples, and finally through social media, where a guest's recorded video of Daniel's speech went viral. Victoria disappeared from the social circles that had once celebrated her. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends who had spent years orbiting her stopped returning calls. The very people who had taught her to value status above kindness abandoned her the moment her status became a liability. For the first time in years, Victoria found herself truly alone. She moved out of the apartment Daniel had been paying for into a modest 1-bedroom in Queens. The isolation forced something in her that years of luxury never could: genuine reflection. She thought often of that day, of Amara's small face crumpling in pain, of Marisol's quiet dignity even as she'd been humiliated. The memory haunted her, resurfacing in quiet moments, refusing to let her hide behind old excuses. One evening, nearly 2 months after the gala, Victoria found herself standing outside a small community center in Queens, where she'd heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that Marisol sometimes brought Amara for after-school programs on the housekeeping staff's days off. Victoria stood across the street for nearly 20 minutes, working up the courage to cross. When she finally did, she found Marisol sitting on a bench outside, watching Amara play with other children nearby. Marisol's posture stiffened the moment she recognized Victoria approaching. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Victoria said quickly, hands raised slightly. I needed to say something. In person." "I am so sorry," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "Not because Daniel found out. Not because it cost me everything. I'm sorry because I hurt your daughter, and I hurt you, and there's no excuse good enough to explain why I let myself become someone capable of that." Marisol studied her for a long moment. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she finally asked. "It wasn't the paint. It was watching my daughter learn in that moment that some people think they're better than others because of money. I've spent her whole life trying to protect her from that lesson." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I used to know better. I used to be better. I let people convince me that kindness was weakness, that looking down on others somehow lifted me up. It didn't. It just made me empty." Marisol was quiet for a long moment, watching Amara laugh with another child across the playground. "My grandmother used to say that money doesn't change people. It just shows you who they really were underneath, once the pressure is removed. The question is, who are you, underneath all of it?" Victoria had no immediate answer, but the question lodged itself deep in her chest, refusing to let go. Meanwhile, Daniel had thrown himself into a different kind of transformation. Shaken by how easily he'd overlooked cruelty in someone he loved, he established a foundation in Amara's name, the Amara Project, dedicated to providing scholarships and educational resources for children of domestic and service workers across the country. Marisol, with Daniel's encouragement and financial support, enrolled in night classes to finish the nursing degree she'd abandoned years earlier. "You don't have to do this," Marisol had told Daniel when he first offered to cover her tuition. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Daniel replied. "It's recognition. You've shown more integrity in 3 years working in my house than most people show in a lifetime. I should have recognized that sooner." As weeks passed, an unexpected friendship grew between Daniel and Marisol, not romantic, but built on profound mutual respect. Through their conversations, he began reconnecting with the values he'd nearly lost sight of amid wealth and success. Victoria, meanwhile, began volunteering at the same community center where she'd found Marisol, quietly, without publicity. She worked with children, helped tutor after-school programs, slowly rebuilding pieces of the person she used to be before greed and status had buried her beneath layers of cruelty. It wasn't redemption overnight. Some days, old habits resurfaced, a flash of impatience, a moment of judgment quickly caught and corrected. Genuine change, she was learning, wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was 1,000 small choices, made again and again, slowly rebuilding character one decision at a time. What would you do if you were in Victoria's place, given the chance to rebuild yourself after losing everything? 1 year later, a single invitation would bring everyone back together and reveal just how far some hearts can truly travel. 1 year after the gala that shattered Victoria Caldwell's carefully constructed world, an invitation arrived at a modest apartment in Queens. It was for Amara's kindergarten graduation ceremony, a small, simple event at a public elementary school, nothing like the lavish parties Victoria once attended, but it meant more to her than any gala ever had. Marisol had sent the invitation herself. "Are you sure?" Victoria had asked when Marisol called to extend the invitation personally. "After everything? People can change," Marisol said simply. "I've watched you change this past year. Slowly, but it's real. Amara still talks about you sometimes, the woman who said sorry. Kids remember kindness, even when it comes late." On the morning of the ceremony, Victoria arrived early, dressed simply, no designer labels, no entourage. She found a seat near the back of the small auditorium, watching as proud parents filmed their children walking across a makeshift stage in tiny caps and gowns. When Amara's name was called, the 5-year-old bounded across the stage with the same bright energy Victoria remembered from over a year ago, except now her smile reached all the way to her eyes, unburdened by fear. After the ceremony, Amara spotted Victoria in the crowd and, without hesitation, ran over and wrapped her small arms around Victoria's legs. "You came," Amara said, beaming. "Mommy said you might not, but I told her you would." Victoria knelt down, tears blurring her vision. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I made you something," Amara said, pulling a folded paper from her small backpack. "It's a picture, like the one before, but better." Victoria unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a drawing, herself, Marisol, and Amara, all holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun, with the word friends carefully printed across the top in Amara's wobbly 5-year-old handwriting. Victoria pressed the drawing to her chest, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Across the room, Daniel watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. He'd come to the ceremony too, not for Victoria, but to support Marisol and celebrate Amara's milestone, having grown genuinely close to the family over the past year. As the crowd began dispersing, Daniel approached Victoria, who quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed to be caught crying. "You showed up," he said simply. "I should have shown up a long time ago," Victoria replied. "For a lot of things." Daniel nodded slowly. "I read about the volunteer work you've been doing. The tutoring program. People talk, even when you're trying to stay quiet about it." Victoria offered a small, genuine smile, the first one Daniel had seen from her in over a year that didn't feel performed for an audience. "I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to remember who I used to be before I let other people convince me that kindness made me weak." "For what it's worth," Daniel said, "I think you're finding your way back." That evening, as Victoria walked home through Queens instead of calling a car service, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 year. She had lost the mansion, the social status, the engagement that once defined her entire identity. But somewhere along the way, walking through humility and consequence, she had found something far more valuable. The woman she used to be, before wealth taught her that some people mattered less than others. She thought of her grandmother's old saying, the one her own mother used to repeat before they'd risen out of poverty in Pittsburgh decades earlier. "Kindness costs nothing, but its absence costs everything." For years, Victoria had forgotten that lesson, buried beneath designer labels and country club memberships, and the desperate need to prove she belonged among people who valued nothing but appearances. But sometimes, it takes losing everything to remember what actually matters. Sometimes, redemption doesn't come wrapped in dramatic, sweeping moments, but in small ones. A drawing held by trembling hands. A child's unconditional forgiveness. A single choice, repeated daily, to be better than you were yesterday. Victoria Caldwell would never fully escape what she'd done that day in the Hartwell mansion. The video still existed online, a permanent reminder of her worst moment. But she had also chosen, every single day since, not to let that moment define the rest of her story. And perhaps that, the daily choice to grow, to change, to do better, is the truest measure of redemption any of us can hope to achieve. Life lesson. Wealth and status can change how the world sees you, but they should never change who you choose to be underneath it all. True character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps our channel reach more people who need these reminders. Subscribe if you want more emotional, inspiring stories like this one every week. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever witnessed someone change for the better? And please share this story with a friend or family member who might need to hear today that it's never too late to become who